Good evening, everybody. I want to just talk about heavy rail for the Bristol area, and Tina is going to follow talking about alternatives such as light rail and so on. So without further ado, because I've only got 10 minutes, I'm going to move on. And we're talking about railways for the Bristol conurbation, really. Next slide. I thought I'd just shove this up. This is a plan of probably the 1930s, showing all the different stations and lines around Bristol. If you look, you can see a lot of stations and quite a few lines have disappeared. We can't reinstate them, but there are still quite a lot that we could use more effectively. Next slide, please. Why are we bothered about trains? Well, first of all, I'm sure you know these sort of things. Transport, in terms of CO2 emissions, is one of the biggest emitters of carbon dioxide. Next slide. And footprints, if you average out the passengers for different forms of transport, trains come out very well. On an average train, I don't know where these figures exactly came from, but very low carbon dioxide per passenger kilometre in comparison to other forms of transport. So heavy rail does have a part to play in reducing emissions, and obviously it goes for other things like NOx as well. But beside and above that, rail has the good thing about rail is it can carry a lot of people fast on a dedicated route between A and B and get them to another station or whatever from where they can catch a bus or train, a car or something else. So trains are good, and they provide, I think, a spine for the transport, and then other public transports can link up with that. Next slide. What is Fosborough? I'm speaking from Fosborough. It started off as a passenger association trying to make people aware of the Severn Beach line, which I'll explain in a minute, and in the 1980s, and some very good people were laying on special trains to take people around using the railways. That was in the mid-1980s. It morphed then into the Friends of Severn Beach Railway in the mid-1990s, and probably most of you know Julie Boston. She was one of the instigators of it. And then later on, we decided that Severn Beach Railway wasn't the only thing that mattered in the area, but the whole Suburban Bristol Railways. And so we renamed from 2003 onwards as Friends of Suburban Bristol Railways. We've got about 200 paid up members, and I think, looking, we've got 400 Facebook followers. I'm not sure if that's right, but we've got quite a few. We produce 3 newsletters per year, and we've got a website, which is a very good website, just been recently updated. The sort of things we do, we attend all the council and other various rail transport meetings. People like Tino's battling on at these everlasting meetings. A lot of it is replying to consultations, trying to get our view across, writing reports, things like that. Press releases, very important. And probably the most important thing is liaising with movers and shakers, so to speak, to try and influence them into our way of thinking. And it has been successful because of what we have done. We are actually asked for advice on many aspects of rail. So we have done quite a lot of work, and but it is an uphill struggle. So next slide, please. At the moment, we're campaigning for an immediate increase in frequency on the Severn Beach line for every 30 minutes. And we want to accelerate Metro West, which I'll explain in a minute, and have better and more stations, better capacity and better services. Next one. such as, for instance, we've got a situation here where we are actively trying to get people interested in recreating a missing link. At the moment, you can see here the Severn Beach line goes from Temple Meads through Clifton down Avonmouth up to Severn Beach. As part of the new Metro West works that's going to be done, there's going to be another line going up here, another service going up to Hembury. All very nice, serving the whole new housing estate around Filton Airfield. But you can see here, there's a great big gap where there is going to be no rail linkage. There is already a goods freight line, but the consultants who actually worked out whether the Hembury station was going to be a good one or not, put in such low passenger uptake figures that it was considered to be it wasn't worthwhile doing. So we have the silly link where we have a spur up to Hembury, and we have a spur there, but no linkage. And a linkage would obviously be very important, very useful to get people round the system better. Okay, next one, please. I'll skip that one. Next one. Optimism, yes, why not? In May 2008, the Bristol City Council paid for the second train on the Severn Beach line. Before this, the service on the Severn Beach line was appalling, unreliable, nobody was using it, and we was trickling along on fairly low passenger numbers. If you just flick onto the next slide, please. This is what happened to the passenger numbers when we got this service improved. So pre-208, we had an unreliable service. We introduced the second train set, so we had greater reliability from May 2008. And from then on, it's taken up and up. Don't worry about the different numbers for each of the years. They're just different ways of calculating. But you can see that the passenger numbers have increased up to this fabulous number of 1.4 million in 2019. So the message is, if you provide a better service, a reliable service, people know what's going to happen, they'll use it. Coming back a slide then, can you, Doreen? Yeah. The other things that have happened, Metro West has been proposed. I'll explain that in a minute. We have been instrumental in helping getting up various new services. And I think part of what we did was push for the Filton Bank for a four tracking of Filton Bank, and that was completed last year. And various other things there, which are all sort of, yes, it is fairly optimistic. Let's move on. So Metro West, I've been talking about, this was promoted, this was put forward in 2008, and it was put forward as two phases, phase one, phase two, and phase one was reopening Portishead line, various other things, and that was going to be ready and finished in May 2019. It is now 2020. Reopening the Portishead line, stations of Portishead and Pill, half-hourly trains from Temple Meads to Avonmouth, and more trains serving Keynsham, etc. And it was going to have a turnaround in Bathampton. And the phase two, which was going to come later, was a half-hourly train to Yate, half-hourly train to Hembury line. I remember I talked about the Hembury station, and various other things, additional station at Ashley Down, possibly also at Horfield, and that was going to be ready 3 months ago, May 2021. Move on, please. Right, so obviously there's been a lot of toing and froing on this, and luckily, and we're very pleased that Weka in June 2020 this year has now come down quite firmly on what their plans are going to be. There's been slight changes. You can see here we've now got Metro Phase West Phase 1, which is this pink line here. It's going from Avonmouth on a half-hourly service to Westbury. And then the last little bit to Severn Beach will have to be hourly. The second one here, we have Metro West Phase 1B is the Portishead line there, going along through Pill up to Portishead. And then we have Metro Phase 2 sometime in the future, which will go up half hourly up to Gloucester, and then hourly up to North Filton and Hembury. So things are looking up if this happens. Just move on though. Move on, next slide, please. Tina here has been instrumental in setting up this rail plan, which is looking beyond what everybody else has been thinking about, the sort of things that we could to get a really good service in the area. And you can see here, without looking in too much detail, there's proposed stations and proposed lines. For instance, we're thinking that we ought to open St Anne's Park Station. It existed. It would be a very useful thing for St Anne's area. We're also considering Thornbury line, a line to Thornbury. There is a freight line that nearly goes there. There is going to be huge housing development of Thornbury. Why not a train service there? And this is what we're plugging and pushing as much as we can. Next one, please. Just to talk about West of England Combined Authority, Weka. So it's established from West of England Partnership. We all know the mayor is Tim Bowles. Flying ointment, North Somerset voted not to join Weka. What's new? So we've got a Weka committee, which is the three unitary authorities, that's Bristol, Baines and South Gloucestershire. And then they have to have a West of England joint committee, which is all of them, including North Somerset. It's not a very good situation, really. Weka has money now, devolved money, £30 million a year for, I think, 30 years, which could be spent, part of it could be spent on transport, and we would hope that some of that could go for rail. Next slide, please. Just want to talk about this for a second. You might have heard of the Joint Local Transport Plan. We had version 4 come up, which talked about various things, and some of it is quite good. We're thinking about a new station at Charfield, for instance, etc. But if you look down at the totals, sustainable schemes, which are sort of rail and buses, 25%, partially sustainable 17%, but road schemes, 58% of the proposed budget. We think that roads are not the answer. And I presume some, you might have heard of Dr. Melia at UWE. He's very sure that roads are not the answer, that in fact, the more roads you have, the more cars that fill it up. And so it goes on. We have got to, in fact, cut down roads and produce public transport, rail being one of them. Okay, carry on. Next slide.
Very good.
Have I got any time, Dorian? Oh, dear.
Yeah, no, you've got a bit more time. That's fine.
Okay, so I put this up. It almost seems to be one step forward and 7/8 of a step back when we're trying to get rail improvements around here. Why isn't there more rail improvements? Let's move on. Next slide. Right, I'm just going to go through a few things that I think are the problem. Firstly, we've got something called GRIP, which is, as you can see, Government of Rail Infrastructure Projects. And Network Rail uses this for checking out that things are all right for projects for except routine maintenance. And it's got 8 stages. And these are grip stages, they're called. Grip 1 to 3 is deciding what is required. Grip 4 and 5 covers the design work, and grip 6 to 8 is the parts of the scheme that get it built and handed over. These are the important things here, the grip 1, 2 and 3. 1 is the output definition, what are you trying to achieve? Secondly, what can it be done? And thirdly, grip 3, what is the best way to do it? Now, you might think, oh, this is fairly good, but it is very inflexible, and also is not what it does not do what it should be doing. It is actually creating problems and blocking schemes. We could take the Portishead line, for instance, as one example. 2001, transport consultants hired by North Somerset Council concluded that a half-hourly service to Portishead would be feasible and could run profitably. So in 2006, the scheme was written into the Joint Local Transport Plan, and in 2009, the Council commissioned Network Rail to carry out a technical evaluation. So after it had been declared feasible, Network Rail started to evaluate the scheme, so it had reached, in their terms, grip 1. But of course, North Council already knew exactly what they wanted. They didn't need to be told that trains were going to be better than buses. They already knew that. So nearly 2 years later, Network Rail produced a grip 3 report for Portishead, reached the same conclusion as the one in 2001. Great. So unfortunately, that wasn't quite the end of it, because nobody was actually paying for it at this point, and Bristol area secured funding through Metro West. Metro West was a new project, so Network Rail then had to go back to grip 1 and do it all over again. Can you believe it? In the end, it ended up as grip 3, saying what's the best way to do it, 20 years afterwards. And the price had tripled up to £175 million from the original £45 million. So we could say the grip is not the best scheme, not the best way of managing this, but we're stuck with it at the moment. Other things that don't help in getting new schemes up is the passenger forecasts are always downplayed. We've had various consultants producing reports, say for the Henbury Loop and other stations, where they've said, oh, virtually nobody's ever going to use it, which is patently obviously untrue. But because of that, that's latched on, and they say the scheme is not worth it. I put this tongue-in-cheek, not in London. If anything happened in London, it gets built immediately, or whatever expense. We have a slight problem here. I think there's lack of local experience and enthusiasm. There's no proper PTE or Integrated Transport Authority here, which we need to have. I state this: local opposition and negative influencing by vested interests. I won't actually say who I mean, but there are people who are not very happy of trains increasing and upsetting their little apple cart, their transport. And so it doesn't help us. Nextly, we have the outrageous costs of some of these schemes. And this includes over-the-top contingencies all the time. Network Rail really isn't interested sometimes in opening new rails, new lines, new stations, and they just put any old cost they want on, as far as I could see. And lastly, it's glacial. I mean, I would say geological timescales it takes to get any scheme up and running. It's a wonder anything gets done outside of London. Next one, please. Some of you might have realised that one thing I hadn't talked about is the dreaded COVID and what's that done to the rail. So from mid-March, government effectively took over running the railway. And they kept it open and for certain workers, but at very reduced cost. So they were paying a lot of subsidy. And there was active guidance to avoid rail and of course bus transport. So significantly reduced number of passengers using the railway. Thing is this justified now? So some recent studies have said there's very low risk of contracting COVID during train travel, especially if you use face masks. Next one, the last slide. So the government advice for England is, as you can see there, travel at off-peak times and wearing face masks. Importantly, around here, Great Western Railway, sort of echoing this, but they're also saying now, they put out press releases that the train services are slowly returning to pre-COVID levels. They were conscious that students were returning and they needed trains, so they got the trains which students used increased by the end of August. And then apparently there'll be increased service frequency from 14th of September. And they're expecting weekday services returning to 94% of December 2009, i.e. pre-COVID levels. And another thing that's quite interesting is because obviously work patterns are going to change, people are not going to be commuting every day. Season tickets are not going to be popular, so they're aiming for flexible season tickets or carnets. So you just have a strip of 10 tickets and you can use them as and when, that sort of thing. So I just hope there that I have given you some rough idea of what heavy rail is in the area, what is being done, what are the problems, and how Fosborough and others are trying to help get the thing moving. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you, Tony. That was great. Just one quick plug. Tony mentioned Dr. Steve, is it Melia or Melia?
Melias.
Yes. Oh, okay. Well, Dr. Steve Melia is going to be doing a talk for us in about a month on the 24th of September, and he will be talking all about the joint local transport plan. So if you've got any questions about that and you can hold them for a month, then that is definitely the man to ask about it, because he's really taken a really strong lead on that topic. But yeah, great. Thank you very much for that, Tony. I am now going to put Christina's slides up on the screen, and oops, there we go. So yeah, thank you very much, Tony, and everybody, please welcome our next speaker, Christina Biggs.
Hi, so my name is Christina Biggs, otherwise known as Tina. As Tony mentioned, I'm campaigns lead for Fosborough. So I'm going to talk a bit more about the further proposals, because we have a friendly relationship with a group called the Transport for Greater Bristol Alliance. So I'm going to talk about that briefly today. How long have I got, Dorian?
Sorry, I muted myself. 15 minutes, probably.
Okay, thank you. Great, so next slide, please. So, Tony will have touched on this, which actually Steve will talk about next month as well. So in addition to MetroS phase 1 and 2, so MetroS phase 1 being the Portishead line, phase 2 being Henbury line, there are further aspirations in the joint local transport plan. I think Steve will be focusing on the amount of roads that they're proposing to build. But there is actually £1 billion's worth of rail in the JLT4 as well, which we're quite grateful for. So yeah, Portway Park and Ride should have been started construction September 2020. That's on the Southern Beach line. Charfield, they have committed 2 million, and Charfield's up in the north, between Yates and Caman-Dursley. So that's sort of something that Weka are doing. Caulfield, Salford, St Anne's and Ashton Gate are actually all mentioned in the JLT4. I say mentioned because, as Steve will probably explain, the JLT4 is not a commitment. In a way, it's just a list of aspirations, all of which need to have their business cases proved. So the battle is not over just because it's mentioned. We do have to keep plugging for even the ones mentioned in the JLT4. Wiltshire, in the meantime, have expressed a desire to have a service going from Chippenham, which is on the right, through to Bristol, with additional stations at Corsham, which we got on our map. There's also Royal Wootton Bassett, and they want to see Salford as well. Just before mentioned as a zero carbon fleet, which would be brilliant. We understand that GWR are looking at putting batteries into diesel trains. That's the sort of latest I've heard from GWR. So the idea would be that you'd have it hybrid. So if you had your battery charged, you could use that, and if the battery fails, you've got your diesel. New links to Thornbury and Pilning. We've been plugging away on Thornbury and Pilning for a while now, so that's got a mention in the chart before, which again will not mean anything until we keep pushing until something happens, I'm afraid. New links and more frequent regional services. So something we didn't request, but which Weka have talked to GWR about, is getting better train services across to Portsmouth, for example, up north, Oxford to Bristol service, which sounds interesting. But Fosbury, we're much more about local rail. That's our focus. Next slide, please. So there is this is the problem really about heavy rail. Just to mention right up front, is it tends to be either hourly or half hourly. So I don't know if Jane explained, but Portishead line was going to be half hourly, which would have been terrifically expensive, and they had to scale it back just to try and fit even within twice the original budget, and it's going to be hourly with Portishead. I see Barry Cash is on this circle. I know his feelings on this. There will be a 45-minute service in the morning, but it's just, you can't double track the Portishead line. It goes along the Avon Gorge, so even upgrading it would have only given half hourly. It's just not, unless you can double track the line, you won't get to any better than half hourly. Henbury at the moment is scheduled to be an hourly service, which many people have said, well, what's the point of that? Our view is that let's put something in now, and there is capacity to go to half hourly, but with heavy rail, it's difficult to get better than half hourly. So that's the main thing to say before I go on to what I'm actually talking about, which is light rail. But I would say that heavy rail does go a certain way. Even half hourly is quite welcome, I would argue. It's better than hourly, and it's certainly better than nothing. But I think there is an aspiration, obviously, to have more frequently. But if you have to do that, you need to do things like double track 7 Beach line, which it is not at the moment. So you have to be aware of that there's extra cost involved in getting heavy rail to a good frequency, which in Cardiff is 20 minutes or 10 minutes. So that's to be bear in mind when you talk about heavy rail. That's why I said at the bottom, well, exactly. Yeah, as Martin says, hourly service. I guess my argument at the moment is if it's an initial hourly service, people in Portishead will certainly be very excited because they don't have anything. And Henbury, well, that's, they've got the competition with Buster, haven't they? So it's an interesting thing. Would you take the train if you knew that you could get the bus? But I mean, Yates and Keynsham have an hourly service right now. Bridgewater's got an hourly service. So I would still argue that let's put in an hourly service, Henbury, Portishead, and get it to half hourly in Henbury. But yeah, Portishead's going to be a problem, basically. Okay, so that's why we're saying heavy rail is not standalone. Great. So next one. So this is the Metro-S phase 1 and 2 maps, which you've already seen. So let's go on to the next one. And this is our wonderful rail plan, and this is really the extent of what you can expect with heavy rail. Okay, these are all freight lines that already exist. Thornbury, there's a freight line as far as Titherington Quarry. It needs another line up to Thornbury. All these extra stations we're putting in would be on heavy rail lines, but they would involve a slower service. So that's something to bear in mind. If you've got unless you've got 4 tracking, like on Fulton Bank, we will be limiting the speed of these services if you introduce more stops. Maybe that's something we have to accept as part of our future lifestyle, that you'll have slightly slower trains just get your laptop on the train. Yes, overcrowding on hourly, you can actually increase the length of a train. That's the other thing you can do with trains, is if you can't make them more frequent, at least you can tack on extra carriages. The Severn Beach line is 40 minutes. So the 40-minute service is very well used. But yes, it's better than hourly. But yeah, hourly's borderline, but let's still encourage Weka to deliver it. And as I said, for Henbury, you can get that to halfway. Length of platforms, again, that's extensible. Most platforms will take 3, 4, 5 carriages, certainly at Clifton down. But yes, every time you have a new station, you have to specify what length of platform you will need. And obviously longer platforms are more expensive. So that's part. Right, I'm going to carry on now. So next slide. So our friendly group that we're friends with is called the Transport for Greater Bristol Alliance. They're a lot less visible than we are as Fosborough, because they're quite informal, but they're extremely well informed, I would say. And anyway, so this chap, Gavin Smith, who some of you may know, has come up with 2 sorts of plans. So he's come up with an LRT plan, which I'll show you in a bit, but he's also rather brilliantly come up with this idea of traffic management in Bristol. And this is I love it. It's basically saying in Bristol, we have a sort of full-on artery system, masses and masses of roads, but they don't sort of lead anywhere in particular, and they're all full of traffic. And if you know your rat runs, you can just about get rat blockages, but it's awful, and we have a terrible air quality problem. Here's the idea. Rather than having a charging zone, which most people are quite panicked about, the idea of having a charging zone for clean air, if you limit traffic, then what will happen? So the idea is to try routes, the map of Bristol, you can see. If you have red routes, which have no parking on the verge, if you have, better flow, less traffic lights, less, just stream to get there. I mean, Bristol's terrible to get about, just knowing how to get from A to B. But then what you do is you say some routes put us in. Use the green this becomes cycle routes, and much calmer walk, it becomes cleaner air. And then you have to provide a decent public transport system, and TFGB, Gavin Smith, has suggested light rail, and I'm going to just explain that a bit later. But the first thing for me, the cheapest thing, I mean, a bollard doesn't cost a lot, is just to stop people rat running around the city. But at the same time, you've got to make the actual highway work better, so people know where they are, and there's no parking along these highways. And you need to get the bus lanes completely, continuous priority. So you've got these bus routes, and you try and make these bus routes bus only with no traffic, no road traffic. So he's sort of this huge hierarchy, and I'm going to walk you through how his ideas work for Clifton. We've got to, there's got to be difficult for people to drive a carriage, which is a public transport system, which in Gavin's view is LRT. And the good news in the price tag is not much more than what Weka wants to spend on roads. Okay, that's the bottom line. The price tag, I've just worked it out recently, just an estimate, is coming in about 3.5 billion, which sounds not a lot, but that's about what Weka wants to spend on motorways and bypasses and stuff. So there is the money. Okay, right, so let's keep going. Next slide. So here we are. So I'm afraid this is verbal because it's quite hard to put on a map. So the idea is we know hopefully you know your Clifton around here. So, and there's parallel proposals for the rest of the city, but because this is Clifton Climate Action, I'm going to just talk about Clifton. So first of all, immediate, and there's 3 terms, 3 phases Gavin sort out. Immediate term, pop-up cycleways. Okay, so this is what's happening at the moment, but let's extend it. Jacobs Wells Road, the Triangle, Park Road. Right, okay, right, sorry. Yeah, I've gone past rail now, I'm sorry. I'm going to talk about light rail later. Right, Clifton Suspension Bridge should not have motor vehicles. I know we love using it, but you know, it's a beautiful architectural thing. We've got some lots of tourists coming here. People enjoy. Okay, that's a shocker. Okay, you have to be prepared for shockers here because it's going to be painful. Right, we've got to get used. This is Gavin's division, but the price that what you get, the reward is clean Bristol without any charging zones. Think of that. Okay, so bus gate on Park Street. That we should do bus only. I think that's a good idea because cars can go down Park Road, can't they? Okay, so we've got this. Bristol's got far too many roads which are just free for all. Right, next one, rat running. So this is Gavin's big idea that I really like. So you take a road that people are rat running along, and right in the middle you put bollards in, so cycles can get through, but cars can't. Okay, so on the Downs, Ladies Master Road, wouldn't it be nice if it was down? Can't even the cars and non-cycling, right? Have the roads,
Sorry,
the cycles.
to interrupt, but you're breaking up quite a lot. Can I suggest you turn your camera off because it might make your speech a little bit easier to hear.
Turn my camera off.
Is that okay?
Yeah, sure.
I think it'll just keep things
Is that any better?
Let's see. Hopefully. Thanks.
Yeah, right. Okay, let's try that. So, then we've got our wonderful hills up Clifton. So lots of people use these. So Granby Hill, Clifton Vale, Constitution Hill, Clifton Wood Road. People are driving up these beautiful narrow streets when there's perfectly good ways up Clifton, which is Park Road and Bridge Valley Road. So let's make Granby Hill and all of these steep roads have a bollard so people can cycle, people can access their property from either side. Yeah, so we're not taking away access. We're just saying they should not be rat runs. People are just driving through our patch. And this works right across the city. Hampton Road at Cotham Hill and Cotham Brow. You know, they don't have to have cars going along. And there are other ways to get cars through that area. Bus services. So you sort of this idea of an inner ring orbital bus service. So rather than having everything, all the buses going right to the centre, let's truncate the buses at the Triangle, and other buses coming into Gloucester Road, and then have a circular bus. You'll have to change buses, but we've got to try and get rid of the idea that we just got to get really quickly from A to B, because that's destroying our planet. We've got to slow down. So I think if we, changing from a bus that's really frequent, so you come in, get a Triangle, get the circular bus. You might not even want to go to the centre anyway, or you might want to go to Gloucester Road. So, let the bus all go to, because it's causing huge amounts of blockage and bad, and bad air as well. Right, Montpelier Station. So in the immediate term, so many stations are just completely invisible. So let's celebrate the fact that we have, cyclists. Well, there you go. You see, yeah. Well, I'm a cyclist too, and I like walking and cycling up these places. Right. So yeah. So let's celebrate the railway stations that we do have, and I think half hour will be fine. There you go, e-bike. Right, next slide, please. Doreen, next slide, please. Thank you. So next 3 years. So this is still Clifton, and this is Gavin's ideas for the next 3 lanes. So bus lanes, so permanent bus lanes, which nobody can get onto apart from buses. Wouldn't that be great? All the way along White Ladies Road. The way you do it is to remove on-street parking on White Ladies Road. This is not, rocket science. Why should we be parking along these routes when we're trying to get buses along and cars along? You don't need to park right next to your shop, okay? You shouldn't be parking if you're going shopping anyway. You should take the bus, okay? Or cycle, or walk. White Ladies Road section. Have a bus gate on White Ladies Road. Why are we having traffic going up White Ladies Road when you've got Pembroke roads? Okay, you've got other roads that you can send traffic up. This is next 3 years, but we're giving you time to get used to this idea. White Ladies Road, bus priority route, right? So if it's a priority route, that means, again, you don't allow it, the traffic signals start working for buses, giving buses priority over cars. Two-way bus Cape Triangle East, okay? So again, you could be a bus hub at Triangle East. Why are the buses going right down into the centre when lots of people get off at Triangle anyway, right? Next slide, please, Oren. And then in the next 10 years, improvement plans for White Ladies Road, Metro West. By that time, we could be seeing a 10-minute frequency if we can double track the 7 Beach line. That's what would be needed to get to a really high frequency all the way along the 7 Beach line. But, you know, there is room on the railway line. It would just be a bit expensive. Westbourne Tram. This is the tram line now. Okay, so this is Gavin's idea, which I'll explain a bit later. But he's got this idea for tram lines along streets, like in France. So the idea is they mix with traffic, but they have priority going along from the traffic light priority. So he's thinking of Westbourne Tram line, Filton line along Gloucester Road. So Gloucester Road would be one tram line, Westbourne Tram would be the other. Yes, so that's right. Good question. Delivery vehicles, yes. So what they do in Grenoble, for example, they have bollards that the delivery vehicles have a card for. So it wouldn't let cars through, but if you have your access card, it would let delivery vehicles in if it's their shop. And then Gloucester Road could be bus and access only again, so not traffic down Gloucester Road. Stop parking, just have a tram up the centre, and it would be cycling, walking, and tram and bus, I guess. You need buses when they go further afield. You can't have trams everywhere, obviously. Right, so that's it for now. Next one. Yes, that's right. So just like that, just like Broadmead, but you'd extend it across the city, so it's not just Broadmead that gets that. Stapleton Road could do with that kind of treatment. It's very polluted, that area. Right, tram over bus. Good question. I'll address that question actually, Julie. So, did you hear this? Was it yesterday afternoon, 4:30? Radio Bristol were discussing light rail. And basically they interviewed Dave Andrews, who's our friend in Bath, who's been thinking a lot about trams. And they actually inadvertently mentioned the two big advantages of trams. First of all, the fact it's a fixed line, a bit like heavy rail. When you come to a new city, you can get to know the train and tram system very quickly because it's on a map. It's non-negotiable. You can't change a tram route or a heavy rail route, and that's the advantage. Is you can see it, it's visible. You see this tram line. Oh, that's a tram. I can get on that. There's a nice map that you'll see in front of you, hopefully, when this happens in Bristol. And it's much clearer to navigate. When people know there's a tram line, they start to build their business near a tram line. Exactly with heavy rail. Yep, Park and Rail at Portishead line. Yeah, that's right, Junction 5. Yes, that one. Yeah, so light rail's got that advantage for the heavy rail. The other thing, of course, is it's cleaner. Buses have this much more pollution. You've got tyre dust as well as diesel. Trams tend to run electric. You can have electric overhead wires. They can run on biogas, and they can run on hydrogen. So the proposal that the Bath people have got is to run hydrogen trams, which is very exciting. But you can also have overhead and mix the two if you really want to. And they're quiet. They're much quieter than bus, and they are quite. You can have quite long vehicles for light rail, and they can run very frequently. As to 10-minute, 15-minute frequency. Right, so this is what Gavin's dreamt up as a network. And just to tell you again, so I went away, and yes, capacity, that's right. So you can have much more vehicles with light rail. They're quite long. I think if you've been to a city with capacity, with trams, you know, they come along quite frequently, and people stand up and hold the rails, and it's just quick and it's silent as well. That's the other nice thing about them. Okay, so this is what Gavin has thought up. So what his vision really is to start with the Metro West, which we've already discussed. And that would mean probably double tracking where we can along the Severn Beach line to get that up to 10-minute frequency. But then he's got this idea. So where we are, we'd have the White Ladies Road would be one tram line. That's the green one. A bit further over, the red one would be the A38 Gloucester Road. Then the purple one is the M32. So he's got this idea of having a tram line alongside the M32 that then goes up and it joins up with Emerson's Green, the North Ring Road. So you have a lovely tram line there. And then you link up with Yates, because Yates already got the Thornbury line. So you could reinstate the Thornbury line. It'd have to be double tracked, but it could be a light rail line, which is just less heavy duty. It's a light rail does mean light. It's less volume. It's less weight in the rails. They're thinner and smaller because the vehicles are lighter. That's why it's called light rail. The problem is that if you try and mix light and heavy rail, if you have a crash, then of course the light rail vehicle will come off a lot worse. So I think the lesson is that you really want to try and if you're going to use a heavy rail line, just use it for passenger light rail and freight, because freight is, I mean, there's a crash problem there, but at least freight doesn't operate very much. They do it in Rotherham. They can mix freight and light rail. So yeah, so you'd have to dedicate the existing Metrobus lines just for light rail plus freight. That's the best way to do it. But we do have the full tracking along Filton Bank, and yeah, you might have to make the light rail vehicles slightly heavier, and then it calls tram train. So just heavier vehicles that can kind of fend for themselves on a heavy rail line. Okay, so we'll just zoom in. The next one is the last one. It's just zooming in on next to the last one, sorry. And it's just looking in a bit more closely at where we are, as it were. So again, you've got Clifton down up to Henbury would be along White Ladies Road. So it'd just be mixing with the traffic. It's the wonderful. This is what Steve Mealy will talk about next month. Is the idea of road space removal. Yeah, I think it's still an issue, Martin, about light and heavy rail. I have heard that that's a safety issue. You can argue with them, I don't know, but that's what I've heard. So Henbury, and then A38 would go to Southmead Hospital, and then up to the Arena, and then up to Cribbs Causeway. You'd have the heavy rail coming through. So the black line is heavy rail. But then in the south, the idea is to have a south a rail coming through from the South Bristol and then ending up in Sevenside. I think that's the green. Yeah, that's the purple line. And so forth. And the idea is you could have several lines in East Bristol, not just the one that Weka want to do. I want to say at this point that Weka are talking about a mass transit line. Yeah, you're right, Martin. It's a conversation that one can have. Yeah. Yes, exactly. I'm glad to have got everyone chatting around. This is great. Yes, I just wanted to say, Weka, West Midlands Combined Authority, have drafted this mass transit plan. They are only thinking of 4 lines. They want one line to the airport, which we think is a bit silly because we just shouldn't be encouraging people to use the airport anyway. They want another line to Bath, which we agree with. They want another line to Aztec West, which would be this red line that Gavin's suggesting. And then they're suggesting one line to East Bristol, but we think it'd be better to have an M32 line, the purple one, the green one up to Fish Ponds, plus a blue one out to Warmley, and then there's another one further out we're thinking maybe along to Hanham. And the good news is that when you add up, next slide please, So yeah, this is the money. This is the thing. So the Weka JLTP4, which Steve will tell you more about next month, road schemes 3.1 billion. We agree with Steve that you just don't need to build any of them, because if you build roads, people will just fill them up with traffic. That is just known. It's science. The science of a saturated system. And I've written an article about this, which I'm sure Nikki can link to. They're suggesting on 2.6 billion to mass transit. So that's overground. Mass transit would be 2.6 billion for the 4 lines they want. Marvin's underground would be, we think, 6 billion. I think that's the figure I've heard from somewhere. I think that's in the Weka JLTP4 as well. 1 billion they're allocated for local rail, which, you know, it's a good sum of money. We'd like to see that happen. Metro bus 0.83 billion, that's the additional investments. Cycling walking routes a mere 0.4 billion, and I think you could put far more. But then if you think about it, this traffic management idea, you're creating cycling routes simply by putting a bollard in the middle of a rat run. So you don't need to spend quite so much on cycling. But yeah, so I just sort of had a look at some Gavin's proposals. He added up all the, so what I've used is 25 million per kilometre for light rail. That's for putting everything in. 10 million per kilometre is if you've already got a rail there. So I sort of added up all this length of track, which is quite substantial, and I reckoned about 3.5 billion, and the outside estimate's 2. This is hot off the press, okay? I really just worked it out yesterday. So between 2 and 5 billion. But if you look at what Weka are going to do, well, exactly 6 billion could be an underestimate for underground. We're arguing you don't need an underground, and the reason for that is if you put an underground in, you've still got the surface traffic, you've still got the saturation. You will not divert people from surface to underground. You will only get more people total, and then new people use the underground, but there will still be the people wedded to their cars overground. So all it will do is increase the total number of people travelling, increase the total congestion, pollution, everything will just still go up. The only way to get people to use public transport is to take away road space, and Steve will explain that very clearly next month. Well, talk to Steve next month. I don't want to steal his thunder. He has he certainly convinced me, and I said Nikki could probably give you a link to my article in Rail Professional, right, to expand on that. Okay, I think that's it. So, well, exactly, yeah. I hate underground. I just, in my article, I just say, well, you're going to just create dirty air underground as well as dirty air overground. Is that what we want for Bristol? So I'm really hoping. But the point about this is this surface light rail proposal. You know, we're spending about the same as what Weka want to spend on roads anyway. And cycling too. Yeah, so cycles do get worried about light rail in the street. And it's true, if you try and cycle sort of next to a light rail thing, your wheel will get stuck. But it's usually junctions. So if you have a junction, the light rail sort of dive. If you go to the harbour, for example, you've got the harbour rail. So the harbour rail, and when they have a junction, it is quite tricky to get across on the cycle. I think you just have to, you know, get off and walk when there's a junction. But if it's not a junction, then you've just got 2 rails which you can cycle between, I would say. So I think we've got to get used to these things. You know, people always raise objections. It's, oh, we can't do because of that. But what's the alternative? Are we going to continue with Bristol, with smog city? Yes, I think carriages can accommodate bikes. I mean, again, it's just the conversation you have when you're designing these systems. I think I was in Toronto, and you know, the trams are lovely there. So I think we'll stop for questions, and Tony's here. Obviously, we can both answer.
Yeah, so thanks very much, Tina. That was great. I'm first of all just going to flash where is it? This back up on screen, because I know that now that our speakers have stopped talking, a lot of people will start leaving, which hopefully you'll all stick around for the Q&A. But yes, just a reminder for those of you who are watching this, do check out our websites. Our email addresses are up there. Check out the local and green resources, particularly the transport page is going to be very relevant to this talk. Like we've mentioned a couple of times, we've got a really relevant talk in about a month's time, the 24th of September, with Dr. Steve. I need to learn how to say his last name. It's Melia. Melia?
I don't know. Melia? I've always thought it was Melia, but yeah.
I'll email about that so that I don't embarrass myself on the 24th. But yes, and one final thing, as you can see in the middle here, if you have enjoyed tonight's talk and you'd like us to be able to keep doing these for a long time, you can go to paypal.me/Clifton Climate Action. Any donations will be split between Clifton Climate Action and the Bishopston, Cotham and Redland Energy Group. We put these events on together, so they are a joint effort between the two groups. And yeah, they'd be very much appreciated. So let's have a look at some questions. Tina answered a lot of the questions that were coming in, so I'm going to have to go back up to the top, I think, to find something that hasn't been covered already. Because I think
I did see one question actually. There was about gradients, yeah, and Martin's answering that as well. Yes, definitely, trams can work on the gradients. They would need a traction system, so that does involve slightly extra cost, but yeah, it can be done. Yeah, I mean, they are lighter vehicles. That's the point. They're better able to cope with gradients than heavy rollers.
Okay.
Well, exactly. Martin's made the point.
Okay, I can't read the top and bottom of the chat. So I think what we'll do is we'll just, if anyone's got any more new questions that haven't been answered yet, stick them in the chat now. And we'll just read from the bottom, because I'm not going to be able to keep up with everything otherwise. So yeah, please. What have we got? Trams could work up to 10%. Okay. Most of Bristol had trams previously. That's true. Only folding bikes are allowed on Croydon trams. No normal bike space at all. That's a shame. Okay, okay, maybe I will have to go up to the top to find new questions. There was one about accessing Sean or Norman, I'm not sure who, had a question about accessing the station at Stapleton Road unaided because of the combined gap and drop from the train to the station platform. I assume that the stations you're talking about reopening would have to be done in a way that was broadly accessible.
Yes, I mean, yes, that's your chance really. When you reopen a station, you've got to rebuild the platform. But what is true is, of course, there's a range of types of train, aren't there? So some trains would have doors lower down. I'm not. I think I'm going to give that one to Tony.
Okay, Tony.
I'm pretty sure that you have to have accessibility built into the station opening. That is part of it. I don't think there's going to be trains up and high up in the sky and then right down low that's going to affect it. So I think accessibility has got to be built in. It's part of the thing now. That Network Rail probably wouldn't allow a station to open without it.
Mm-hmm. There was another question here. Apparently, one of the major sticking points for the Portishead line has been the necessity to avoid installing a level crossing. Is that current? Is that a common problem? Rather, is there any way around that with something like the Portishead line?
I mean, there's the station at Portishead was chosen to avoid going over a level crossing. That its location. But also we've got the level crossing at Ashton Gate, which is a problem. And I think there was a scheme to take the traffic away from the road. I can't remember the name of the road that goes across the level crossing there, and take it round behind, so that the level crossing, the railway, had a free access. At the moment, they're worried that too many trains going over the level crossing will not allow sufficient traffic to get into the industrial estate at the back.
Well, that's now been, Tony, I think that's been superseded, because that was when we were thinking about half-hour service, but now it's going to be hourly and 45 minutes.
I realise that.
Yeah, they've realised it's no longer a problem for the Portishead line. But yes, I mean, level crossings are very much a concern, but they exist, and you just have to plan for them. It puts extra cost onto the whole thing. I mean, the Severn Beach line's already got 3 level crossings down by Avonmouth.
Really?
The Westbury line out to Westbury, it's already got 2 or 3 level crossings there. The alternative is for them to close level crossings altogether, which I don't think is going to happen. I think there's an aspiration to avoid level crossings, but they are a fact of Network Rail life, and they will not be a deal breaker, put it that way.
Okay, great. So a question that's just come in a minute ago. Does anyone know how successful Bristol Metro system is doing, and what are the future plans to improve it and get more usage? Is that, I guess that's about the Metro bus. Do you guys want to talk about Metro bus at all?
Metro bus, I think, I don't know all the figures, but what I understand is that it's got a good ridership, but not as much as people were hoping. So if you ask Weka, they will say, yes, it's been a great success, and they'll say something like 40,000 passengers. I think the problem with Metro bus is it goes around the houses rather. So people who don't like the transit time of their particular journey might have stopped using it. Mm-hmm. I think set with COVID, it's all got kicked back in, it's an awful situation, buses and trains both. I think I would say it was reasonably successful, and I would encourage people to use the Metro bus. But I think the argument from the tram end is just to say that tram is proven to encourage people out of cars in a way that bus just doesn't seem to. So we'd like to get people to use buses, but at the end of the day, motorists will trust a train or tram when they wouldn't really trust a bus to replace their car journey. So that's part of the argument for having a light rail system. Interesting.
That's funny that a tram would be considered so different to a bus. That doesn't.
It's just what I'd have to refer you to the fast trams people, because they've really looked into all of this. And so shall I answer that next one?
It is.
Go on, Tony.
I mean, it is easier to find your way around on a tram.
Yeah.
It's a fixed line. You know exactly where you're going, exactly what Tina said. And the other thing about Metro bus was that it kept crunching into and joining into normal traffic. And so although it could speed along everywhere else, as soon as it hit these pinch points, we're in trouble. And the service was getting totally out of kilter.
And are any of these problems fixable, or is this entirely baked in because it has a route now? And
you mean Metro bus?
Yeah.
But the problem with Metro bus was simply that when it came to a junction, they decided it'd be too expensive to make the Metro bus independent of the junction. I mean, they could have these bus lanes, but when it came to junction, they would rejoin the traffic. So I guess the answer would be that when you're doing a future Metro bus system, you kind of have to do its own junction, which is hard to think about, because how does the Metro bus get past the junction when you've got roads in all directions? So that could be an inherent problem with Metro bus, because it's a road-based solution.
And what you're talking about is future Metro bus projects. I mean, we'd all like them to learn from the mistakes of this one, but it sounds like you're saying that the Metro bus is going to continue to be as popular as it is, and it's not going to get better for the people who wanted it to do what they wanted. Okay, that's...
Yeah, I mean, I guess they will have to think more carefully for future Metro buses, and I really hope they talk to people like James Freeman to try and get Metro bus better. But I would say junctions must be an inherent problem for Metro bus, because they're going to have to join the junction at some point. And how do you design a junction which won't slow a Metro bus down getting across it?
Okay. So there's another question in the chat from Caroline. On the short platforms on Bradford-on-Avon, they just tell you which carriage to be in. Wouldn't shorter platforms make new stations cheaper? Does it work like that?
I think it's to do with safety, and it's how many people you're expecting to use the station. So I think that argument would work, I guess, for small, just out of the way stations. Mm-hmm. It's when you're talking about having Ashton Gate or North Filton, the Brabazon Arena is right next to a potential railway station. Mm-hmm. And since the Brabazon got planning permission, the Network Rail again having to thinking about, well, do we have to now have a longer platform because we'll have huge crowds coming off these trains. And the annoyance with stadium stations like Ashton Gate and North Filton is that they don't happen very often. The events don't happen very often. So you're planning for this great big long platform, but you know, the big events aren't that often. So the business case is quite poor. But yes, I'd say for rural stations, yeah, you have to have something called selective door opening, and not all trains have that. But that's a technological problem that you can overcome. But I think the idea of having a new station is you're hoping lots of people will use it. Mm-hmm. So if you just plan for, you're just going to need one carriage, but that's not going to happen anyway. I mean, station platforms are, they're what they are, and they're not sort of 3 or 4 carriage lengths. And I think the other issue is when there's rail replacement. Tony, you might be able to help me out on this.
Rail replacement, what?
Well, a legal requirement to have a certain minimum platform length for all stations in case you have a train stopping there that can't get further. I think this is something Dave Redwell will be able to talk about.
Yeah, I mean, I think you can't sort of plan for every station to have 7 carriages on. It's just not feasible. So you're going to have some which are going to be less. So if you have bigger trains, you're just going to have to, I don't know what you're going to do then, but it is a problem.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm conscious we're coming up on 9 o'clock, so I'm sorry if we don't get to everyone's questions, but I do want to finish before the hour. So
there's a question on trolley buses. Shall I?
Yeah, go on, take that one.
Yeah, so trolley buses, they have not come into conversations. It's certainly something that's favoured by, several people have mentioned this. I think Gavin Smith's view would just simply be, for a trolley bus, you have to install the overhead wires. It becomes semi-permanent. So why don't you put the tram line in as well? Because then it's much more visible. And then you get the advantages of having rails rather than rubber tyres. But yeah, I think trolley buses, I don't have a problem with the idea. Sweden has an awful lot of trolley buses and they work very well indeed. And at least they're electric rather than diesel. So I think, it's something to continue pushing, if you're a campaigner. I think trolley buses should be part of the conversation.
Mm-hmm. Are there projections for how much traffic the Portway station will take off the road? A lot of empty park and ride buses. How do we get drivers out of the car if they don't charge?
Gosh, Tony, do you know this one?
No, I don't. I haven't seen any. Well, there must be some projections in the
business case.
In the business case, but I can't remember what they are.
I hate to say this, but Tosborough, when we think about Portway, we're sort of thinking, well, it should have gone in years and years back. Why is it, we're a bit mystified, really. It's why it's taken so long and why it keeps costing more. But the person to ask is Keith Walton of Sevenside, because he was much more involved with pushing Portway Park and Ride. I think the hope is that people would trust a train again more than a park and ride bus, that they saw a train station, the great big, British Rail symbol saying, park here and get your train to city centre. We're just hoping that they have more confidence in a rail line to take them in rather than a park and ride bus. I guess the park and ride bus would also get stuck in traffic in a way that railway wouldn't.
Nikki's got her opinions from the sofa. Okay, I think this is the last one. I don't know if you feel like you've covered this already, but Where did it go? Julie's question. What have the barriers been to trams in Bristol? I don't know if you feel like you've talked about that already.
I would say it's simply that people have talked about them on and off for a long time. Everyone says we used to have trams, and then I think about 4 years ago, somebody talked about a tram. And I think, did you hear on Radio Bristol, the presenters were saying it would be lovely, and at the very end she just said under her breath, it'll never happen. And I think there is this cynicism in Bristol, this sense of hopelessness, I think, about any really intelligent solution, and especially with solutions that have been before, talked about before. They just assume there's some inherent problem. And I mean, to be fair, trams you'll have to dig up roads because there isn't room in Bristol to put trams off the road. So that will mean having to divert water, gas. It will be an upheaval. There'll be opposition, I'm sure, to trams. I think the only hope is just to install a couple of lines. Everyone likes it, and then they do another one. Yeah, ITA definitely. We need to encourage Weka to beef themselves up a bit more. West Midlands Rail Authority are brilliant as well. But I mean, Weka are, to be fair, they were only founded in 2017 as a proper combined authority, so they're all quite new on the job. And I'm always one to advocate for being kind and encouraging, and to Weka and just sort of help them, as it were, because they're quite young as an organisation. But other people have other ideas. I'm quite happy to agree that there are different opinions about Weka.
Sure. I just want to make this point that going up to the Edinburgh Festival every year, the trams seemed to take forever to be installed and were incredibly unpopular when they were being put in with the locals. I think they've more or less come round to them now. They've had them for a few years, but the amount of disruption they caused over years and years and years was a running joke at the comedy festival, let's say. But hopefully, if they do it in Bristol, it'll go a lot smoother. Okay, I think we're down to only the really committed now. So we're going to wrap things up. But thank you hugely to Tony and Tina from Fosbur. If you want to check them out, they've got a Facebook page. They've got a website. They mentioned it earlier. What's the website again, Tony?
fosbur.org.uk.
Fantastic. And yeah, please do check out all of our links. They're on the screen still. CliftonClimateAction.org, BCREnergyGroup.org. And please do check out paypal.me/CliftonClimateAction if you want to support these talks. But yeah, we will be back in 2 weeks' time with a talk about home energy efficiency. And then 2 weeks after that with Steve Malia talking about the joint local transport plan. All right. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.